The Valorian Dominion had been watching Earth for a very long time. Their scouts had first discovered the small blue planet nearly 100 years ago. They had decided it was not worth their attention. The creatures living there were soft and weak. They spent most of their time fighting each other over pieces of land. They had barely managed to reach their own moon. The Valorian High Council laughed when they reviewed the reports about humans' commander. Zorath was a proud warrior who had conquered 40 planets in his long career. He had never failed. Every world he visited eventually bowed to the Dominion. Some fought for a few days. Some fought for a few weeks. But they all surrendered in the end. That was simply how the universe worked. The strong took what they wanted, and the weak accepted their fate. When his fleet of 300 warships entered the Sol system, Zorath felt nothing but boredom. This would be another easy conquest. Another world to add to the Dominion's empire. He transmitted the standard message that he had sent to dozens of planets before. Surrender everything. Accept slavery. Or die. On Earth, a retired naval officer named Daniel Carter was sitting beside a quiet lake in Montana. He was 68 years old, and he had spent the last 3 years trying to forget about war. He had seen enough fighting in his younger days. Now he just wanted to catch fish and watch the sunset. The alien transmission interrupted every television, every radio, every phone on the planet. Daniel listened to the cold, emotionless voice demanding Earth's surrender. He set down his fishing rod and looked up at the sky. The stars looked the same as they always had, but he knew everything had just changed. Well, he said to himself, that is not going to work for us. Within hours, the leaders of every nation gathered in an emergency meeting. They argued about what to do. Some wanted to negotiate. Some wanted to surrender immediately and save as many lives as possible. Some wanted to fight, even though they knew Earth had no chance against 300 alien warships. The Valorians gave humanity 72 hours to respond. On the second day, while the world's leaders were still arguing, Commander Zorath grew impatient. He had never waited this long for a primitive species to accept defeat. He decided to teach these humans a lesson they would never forget. He ordered his fleet to fire on Buenos Aires. The city vanished in a flash of white. 2 million people were there one moment and gone the next. Mothers holding their children. Old men sitting in cafes. Students walking to school. All of them turned to ash in less than a second. The Valorians had done this many times before. They knew what usually happened next. The surviving population would panic. Governments would collapse. Within days, sometimes hours. Desperate leaders would beg for mercy and accept any terms that Dominion offered. But something different happened on Earth. People did not panic. They did not run through the streets screaming. They did not turn on each other in fear. Instead, a strange silence fell over the planet. It was the silence of shock, yes, but it was something more than that. It was the silence that comes before a storm. In New York, a construction worker named Paul Martinez heard the news about Buenos Aires. His cousin had lived there with her 2 young daughters. He stood very still for a long moment, and then he walked to his union hall and asked what he could do to help in Tokyo. A young engineer named Yuki Tanaka watched the footage of the destroyed city on her computer screen. She had been working on a project to build better smartphones. She closed that file and opened a new one. She began designing something very different. In Moscow, in London, in Cairo, in Sydney, the same thing was happening. Millions of people were setting aside their normal lives. They were not doing this because their governments told them to. They were doing it because something deep inside them had awakened. Something old. Something that humans had carried with them since they first learned. To stand upright and face the dangers of a hostile. Daniel Carter received a phone call from the Pentagon 3 days. After Buenos Aires, they wanted him to come out of retirement. He had already packed his bag. "I thought you might call," he said. When he arrived in Washington, he found a city transformed. The arguments had stopped. The politicians who had been fighting with each other for years were now working together. It was as if the attack had burned away all the small disagreements and left only one question that mattered. How do we survive? The answer came from an unexpected place. Dr. Linda Morrison was a physicist who had spent her career studying theoretical concepts that most people could not understand. She had been in Buenos Aires 3 months before the attack, giving a lecture at a university. Her daughter, a graduate student, had stayed behind to continue her research. Her daughter had died in the attack. Linda did not cry when she heard the news. She did not scream or collapse. She simply went to her laboratory and began to work. For 3 days, she did not sleep. She barely ate. She filled hundreds of pages with equations and diagrams. Her colleagues worried about her, but they did not interrupt. They could see something in her eyes that they had never seen before. On the 4th day, she called a meeting with the military commanders who had taken over Earth's defense planning. "I know how their shields work," she said, "and I know how to break them." The commanders looked at each other in surprise. The Valorian shields had seemed impenetrable. Their scientists had been studying the energy readings for days, without any progress. How? One of them asked. Linda smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Their shields are designed to stop weapons. They are not designed to stop what I am going to build." Across the planet, the transformation continued. Factories that had been making cars began making spacecraft. Universities stopped teaching normal classes and started training engineers for war. Old enemies forgot their hatred and worked side by side. The world had never been united before. It had taken an alien invasion to make humanity realize that they were all one family. Commander Zorath watched these developments from his flagship, orbiting Earth. His intelligence officers reported that the humans were building some kind of fleet. He found this amusing. "Let them build their little ships," he told his officers. "It will give them hope. And when we destroy everything they've created, their despair will be even greater." He had conquered 40 planets. He knew how this story ended. The primitives always lost. But Zorath had made a mistake that many conquerors make. He had studied humanity's weapons and technology. He had measured their military strength and found it lacking. But he had not studied their history. He had not read about the times when small groups of humans had faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. He did not know about their capacity for stubbornness, for sacrifice, for turning grief into fuel. He thought Buenos Aires would break them. Instead, it had forged them into something new, above the burning memory of 2 million souls. Humanity was preparing its answer. 6 months had passed since Buenos Aires burned. The world that existed before that day was gone forever. In its place stood something the universe had never seen before. 8 billion people working toward a single goal. Every difference that had divided humanity for thousands of years had melted away like snow in summer. Dr. Linda Morrison had not left her laboratory for more than a few hours at a time since the attack. She slept on a small cot in the corner of the room, surrounded by computer screens and scattered papers covered with equations. Her hair had turned gray in the months since her daughter died. She had lost weight, but her eyes burned with a fire that made everyone around her work harder. She led a team of 300 scientists from 40 different countries. Before the invasion, some of them had been rivals. They had competed for funding, for recognition, for the chance to publish their discoveries first. Now, they shared everything. There were no secrets, no competition, no ego. There was only the work. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning. Linda had been staring at the same equation for 16 hours when she suddenly saw what she had been missing. The Valorian shields did not block energy. They redirected it. They pushed incoming attacks away like water flowing around a stone in a river. "We have been trying to hit them harder," she told her team. "We need to hit them differently." She designed a weapon that did not attack the shield directly. Instead, it created a small hole in the fabric of space itself. The shield could not redirect something that was not really there. It was like trying to block a shadow. While Linda worked on weapons, Admiral Samuel Hayes coordinated the construction of humanity's fleet. He was a tall, quiet man who rarely raised his voice. Before the invasion, he had been planning to retire. He had a small house near the coast where he had hoped to spend his remaining years, reading books and watching the ocean. Now he spent his days in a bunker deep underground, reviewing reports from shipyards on every continent. The numbers were staggering. In 6 months, Humanity had built over 2,000 spacecraft. They were ugly, brutal machines that looked nothing like the elegant Valorian vessels. They had sharp angles and exposed weapons and engines that glowed with barely contained power. One of the young engineers had described them as looking like clenched fists. "Good," Samuel had replied. "That is exactly what they are." The Valorians watched all of this from orbit, their sensors detected the new ships being assembled in hidden facilities around the world. Their analysts calculated that humanity might have as many as 500 vessels by the end of the year. Commander Zorath found this mildly interesting but not concerning. "They are building toys," he told his officers during their morning briefing. "Our fleet has conquered species with technology far more advanced than this. These humans do not understand what they are facing." He decided to send another message to Earth. Perhaps it would convince some of them to see reason and surrender. It would make the eventual conquest easier if the population was already broken. "Your efforts are admirable, but futile," the message said. "Surrender now, and we will spare your remaining population centers. Continue to resist, and we will destroy your cities one by one until nothing remains." The response came from Daniel Carter. He had been promoted to serve as the military liaison between Earth's unified command and the civilian government. He was not a general or an admiral. He was just a retired officer who happened to be very good at understanding both soldiers and politicians. Daniel spent 3 hours composing Earth's official response. He wrote and rewrote it dozens of times. He consulted with historians and psychologists. He wanted to say something that the Valorians would remember. In the end, he settled on 4 words: "Come and take them." The phrase was ancient, spoken by a human king thousands of years ago when a much larger army demanded his surrender. Most humans recognized it immediately. It was a declaration that Earth would not negotiate. Earth would not beg. Earth would fight until the last human being drew their last breath. The Valorians did not understand the reference. Their translators converted the words accurately, but the meaning was lost. They had no history of small groups standing against impossible odds. In their culture, the weak always submitted to the strong. That was simply the natural order of things. While the commanders exchanged messages, ordinary people continued to transform their world. Maria Santos was a cargo pilot from Texas who had spent 10 years flying supply runs to orbital stations. She had never fired a weapon in her life. 3 days after Buenos Aires, she walked into a military recruitment center and volunteered for combat training. The officer behind the desk looked at her record and frowned. "You have no military experience," he said. "We are looking for trained pilots." Maria leaned forward. "My sister lived in Buenos Aires," she said quietly. "She had 2 children. They were 5 and 7 years old. Now they are gone. I am going to fly one of your ships, and I am going to make sure that what happened to them never happens to anyone else. You can train me, or I will find another way. But I am going." The officer looked into her eyes for a long moment. Then he stamped her application and handed her a uniform. Stories like Maria's were happening everywhere. Teachers became soldiers. Farmers became engineers. Children who had been playing video games just months ago were now learning to operate complex military systems. The entire human species was transforming itself into an army, in secret facilities, beneath mountains and oceans. Scientists worked on projects that violated every known law of physics. They did not ask if something was possible. They simply found ways to make it work. When one approach failed, they tried another. When they ran out of ideas, they invented new ones. Commander Zorath grew curious about the human activity. He sent scout ships to investigate some of the construction sites. 3 of those ships never returned. The humans had built defense systems that the Valorians had not detected. For the first time in 40 conquests, Zorath felt a small flicker of doubt. It was not enough to change his plans, but it was there. Like a tiny crack in a wall that seemed solid, he requested reinforcements from the High Council. Better to crush this resistance quickly than let it grow. The Council agreed and dispatched an additional 200 ships to join his fleet. On Earth, Daniel Carter received a report about the incoming reinforcements. He called a meeting with Admiral Hayes and Dr. Morrison. "They're bringing more ships," he said. 500 in total? Linda looked up from her calculations. How long until they arrive? 3 months. Good, she said, and returned to her work. That should be enough time. Daniel and Samuel exchanged glances. Neither of them asked what she meant. They had learned to trust her. Whatever she was building, it would be ready when they needed it. Outside, the stars continued to shine in the dark sky. But something had changed. Humanity was no longer looking up at those stars with wonder and curiosity. Now they looked up with determination and cold purpose. The universe had sent its warriors to conquer. Earth was preparing its answer. The first real battle happened near Saturn. A Valorian patrol fleet of 12 ships was conducting a routine sweep of the outer solar system when they encountered something unexpected. Hidden among the rocks and ice of Saturn's rings, a human defense force had been waiting for them. Captain Maria Santos sat in the command chair of her ship. Watching the enemy vessels approach on her display screen, her hands were steady, but her heart was beating fast. She had trained for this moment for 9 months. She had run simulations hundreds of times. But nothing could truly prepare someone for actual combat. Her ship was called the Defiance. The crew had chosen the name themselves. It was one of the first vessels built after Buenos Aires, and everyone on board had lost someone in the attack. They were not soldiers by birth or training. They were ordinary people who had chosen to fight. 12 enemy ships entering weapons range, her tactical officer reported. His name was Kevin Park, and before the invasion, he had been a high school physics teacher. Now he operated weapons systems that could destroy a city. Maria nodded slowly. Hold position. Let them come closer. The Valorians did not expect resistance this far from Earth. Their patrol fleet was designed for reconnaissance, not heavy combat. But 12 of their ships should have been more than enough to handle any primitive human force. The commander of the Valorian patrol sent a standard warning message. Human vessels, you are in violation of Dominion space. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Maria did not bother to respond. She simply waited. When the enemy fleet reached the optimal position, she gave the order. All ships attack. 23 human vessels emerged from their hiding places among Saturn's rings. They had been silent and dark for 3 days, waiting for this moment. Their crews had eaten cold food and spoken in whispers to avoid detection. Now, they unleashed everything they had. The first Valorian ship exploded before its crew understood what was happening. The second followed moments later. The human weapons were crude compared to Valorian technology. But Linda Morrison's research had given them one crucial advantage. Their missiles could penetrate the enemy shields. The Valorian commander reacted quickly. He ordered his fleet into a defensive formation and began returning fire. His ships were faster and more maneuverable than the human vessels. His weapons had greater range and precision. On paper, he should have won easily, but Maria did not fight the way he expected. Instead of forming a battle line and exchanging fire, she scattered her fleet among the ice and rocks of Saturn's rings. The Valorians had to chase individual ships through a maze of debris. Their targeting systems, designed for open space combat, struggled to lock onto targets that kept disappearing behind spinning chunks of ice. Maria flew her ship like she was still running cargo routes. Weaving through obstacles with a skill that amazed her crew, she used the rings as cover, popping out to fire and then vanishing again before the enemy could respond. It was not elegant. It was not how proper space combat was supposed to work. But it was effective. The battle lasted for 3 days. Neither side had expected it to go on so long. The Valorians were not used to fighting an enemy that refused to die. Every time they thought they had destroyed the human force, more ships would emerge from hiding and attack again. On the second day, Maria made a decision that shocked everyone, including her own crew. One of the Valorian cruisers had damaged its engines and was trying to retreat. Instead of letting it go, she ordered an unmanned supply ship to intercept it. The supply ship had been loaded with 6 nuclear warheads. Target is trying to raise shields, Kevin reported. They will have them up in 30 seconds. Maria watched the display screen. The supply ship was accelerating toward the wounded cruiser. The Valorians were shooting at it, but their weapons were designed to destroy spacecraft, not small cargo vessels. Most of their shots missed. 10 seconds to impact, Kevin said. His voice was shaking. The supply ship hit the cruiser just as its shields flickered online. The nuclear warheads detonated on contact. The explosion was bright enough to be seen from Earth. When the battle finally ended, 8 Valorian ships had been destroyed. The remaining 4 fled at maximum speed toward their main fleet. They had not even tried to recover survivors. The human losses were heavy. 11 ships destroyed. 4,000 people dead. Maria stood on the bridge of the Defiance and read the names of every person who had died under her command. It took her almost an hour, but they had won. News of the battle spread quickly. On Earth, people gathered in public square, eased to watch the reports. They did not celebrate with cheering and parties. The victory had cost too much for that. But something changed in the way they held themselves. Their shoulders were a little straighter. Their eyes were a little brighter. Across Valorian space, the news spread even faster. For the first time in 300 years, a Dominion patrol fleet had been defeated by a species marked for conquest. The High Council demanded explanations. Commanders who had conquered dozens of worlds could not understand how primitive humans had destroyed 8 advanced warships. Commander Zoreth received the report in his quarters aboard the flagship. He read it 3 times, looking for errors or exaggerations. There were none. "This is not possible," he said to his second-in-command. "They should not have weapons capable of penetrating our shields." "They found a way," his officer replied. Zoreth stood and walked to the window that looked out at the stars. He had spent his entire career believing that the universe followed certain rules. The strong conquered the weak. Superior technology always won. Primitive species did not defeat the Dominion. Now, a group of cargo pilots and school teachers had killed 3,000 of his soldiers. He sent a message to the High Council requesting more reinforcements. The original plan had called for a slow, methodical conquest of Earth. Now he wanted to crush the humans quickly, before they could build more ships or develop more weapons. The Council approved his request. 1,000 warships would be dispatched to the Sol system. It was the largest fleet the Dominion had assembled in 2 centuries. Nothing could stand against such force. On Earth, Daniel Carter reviewed the intelligence reports about the incoming fleet. He called Maria Santos to congratulate her on the victory and to give her a new assignment. "We need you back on Earth," he said. "We are building a new flagship, and we want you to command it." Maria was silent for a moment. "What about my crew?" she asked. "They are coming with you. We are going to need experienced people for what comes next." Maria looked around the bridge of the Defiance. The ship had been her home for 9 months. Every scratch on the walls, every dent in the floors, told a story. But she understood that the real fight was still ahead. "What should I call the new ship?" she asked. Daniel paused. "I think you already know." Maria smiled for the first time since the battle began. "Buenos Aires," she said. "Buenos Aires," Daniel confirmed. "We are going to make sure they never forget that name." 2 years had passed since the Valorians first arrived. Earth was no longer the peaceful blue planet it had once been. Every continent was scarred by the marks of war. Cities had been rebuilt underground to protect them from orbital attacks. Farms operated in massive bunkers lit by artificial sunlight. Children grew up knowing the sound of warning sirens better than they knew the sound of birds singing. The Valorian main fleet had arrived 6 months after the Battle of Titan Station. 1,000 warships formed a wall around the solar system that nothing could penetrate. Human colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter were cut off from Earth. Supply ships that tried to run the blockade were destroyed within minutes. President Catherine Moore had aged 20 years in the time since the invasion began. Her husband had died defending Mars when the blockade was established. Her only son served on a destroyer somewhere near Jupiter, and she had not heard from him in 3 months. She did not know if he was alive or dead, but she could not afford to think about that. 8 billion people were depending on her. She addressed the planet from a bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The broadcast was sent through underground cables to avoid Valorian detection. People gathered around screens in factories, in shelters, in the cramped corridors of underground cities. "They think they can starve us," she said. Her voice was calm and steady, showing no hint of the fear she felt inside. "They think that if they wait long enough, we will become weak. They think that hunger and darkness will break our spirit." She paused and looked directly into the camera. "They are wrong," the president explained what the military commanders had told her. The Valorians were patient. They had blockaded planets before and simply waited for the population to surrender. Some worlds had held out for years before finally giving up. The Dominion could afford to wait. They had all the time in the universe, but Earth could not wait. The food supplies would last another 8 months at most. The water recycling systems were failing in several major underground cities. If something did not change, humanity would slowly fade away without ever fighting another battle. "We have a plan," Catherine said. "I cannot tell you what it is. The enemy might be listening. But I need you to trust me. I need you to keep working, keep building, keep believing that we can win this war." In her bunker, Dr. Linda Morrison watched the broadcast while her fingers continued typing equations on her computer. She had not stopped working for more than a few hours at a time in 2 years. Her body was exhausted, but her mind remained sharp. She was close to finishing the project that she had started the day after her daughter died. The weapon she was building was unlike anything that had ever existed. It did not shoot projectiles or release energy. Instead, it tore a hole in the fabric of reality itself. Anything caught in that hole would simply cease to exist. Not destroyed, not damaged. Just gone, as if it had never been there at all. The problem was the delivery system. The weapon required someone to physically carry it to the target and activate it manually. The computers and remote systems that might have controlled it from a distance would not survive long enough to complete the process. Linda understood what this meant. She had known it for months. She had made her peace with it. Daniel Carter was 72 years old now. His hair was white and his joints ached in the morning. But his mind was still sharp, and he had become one of the most important figures in humanity's military command. He was not a general or an admiral. He was something more valuable. He was the person everyone trusted. He led the planning for Operation Homecoming. It was the most desperate gamble in human history. Every remaining human warship would attack the Valorian fleet simultaneously. The goal was not to destroy all 1,000 enemy vessels. That was impossible. The goal was to create enough chaos to get one small ship through. To the enemy flagship, that ship would carry Linda, Morrison, and her weapon. The military analysts calculated that the operation had a 12% chance of success. Daniel looked at those numbers for a long time before responding. "Those are the best odds we have had in 6 months," he said. "We are doing this." Maria Santos had been promoted to admiral after the Battle of Titan Station. She now commanded the Buenos Aires, the largest and most powerful ship humanity had ever built. It was not as elegant as the Valorian vessels, but it was tough. The engineers who built it had designed it to take damage and keep fighting. She would lead the main assault while Linda's ship approached the enemy flagship from a different angle. The plan required perfect timing and more than a little luck. If anything went wrong, they would all die for nothing. The night before the operation, Maria visited the memorial wall that had been built in the Buenos Aires main corridor. It was covered with photographs of people who had died since the invasion began. She found the picture of her sister and her 2 nephews. They were smiling in the photograph taken at a birthday party just weeks before the attack. "I'm going to finish this," she whispered to them. "One way or another, it ends tomorrow." In her laboratory, Linda Morrison completed her final calculations. The weapon was ready. The delivery system was ready. All that remained was for her to do her part. She wrote 3 letters. One was to her research team, thanking them for their work and explaining the technical details they would need to continue her research if she failed. One was to President Moore, offering advice on the rebuilding efforts that would follow if the operation succeeded. One was personal, addressed to her daughter, even though her daughter would never read it. Daniel Carter found her sitting alone in her lab at 3 in the morning. E did not say anything. He just sat down beside her and waited. "I am not afraid," Linda said finally. "I thought I would be, but I am not. I've been dead since Buenos Aires. Everything since then has just been waiting." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand. Do you think it will work?" she asked. He thought about the question for a long time. He had learned not to lie to people who deserved the truth. "I think you are going to change the universe," he said. "I think 1,000 years from now, people will still remember what you did tomorrow. And I think your daughter would be proud of you." Linda smiled. It was the first genuine smile anyone had seen on her face in 2 years. "Thank you," she said. Outside the bunker, in the darkness of space, 1,000 Valorian warships waited. They had been patient for 6 months. They could be patient for 6 more. Eventually, the humans would surrender. They always did. Tomorrow would prove them wrong. The Battle of Earth began at dawn. Greenwich Mean Time. It was a symbolic choice. Humanity wanted to meet its fate in the light. Commander Zorath was in his quarters when the first alarms sounded. He had been studying reports about decreasing food production on Earth, calculating how many more months it would take for the humans to collapse. The alert interrupted his thoughts. "What is happening?" he demanded as he strode onto the bridge of his flagship. His tactical officer's face was pale with confusion. "Human ships, Commander. They are launching from everywhere." Zorath looked at the display screen and felt something he had not experienced in 40 years of conquest. He felt surprised. Ships were emerging from places his sensors had never detected. They rose from craters on the moon. They burst out of the atmospheres of gas giants where no vessel should have been able to hide. They appeared from asteroid fields that his patrols had marked as empty. Wave after wave of them, more than he had ever imagined possible. "How many?" he asked quietly. His officer checked the readings 3 times before answering. "Sensors indicate approximately 4,000 vessels." 4,000. 6 months ago, his intelligence officers had estimated that humanity possessed fewer than 800 ships. Somehow, they had hidden thousands more. Admiral Maria Santos led the first assault wave from the bridge of the Buenos Aires. Her ship cut through the Valorian defensive formations like a blade through paper. The weapons designed by Linda Morrison's team burned through enemy shields as if they were not there around her. All ships from every nation on Earth flew in perfect coordination. Old enemies fought side by side without hesitation. Russian pilots covered American destroyers. Chinese cruisers protected European frigates. The divisions that had defined human history for thousands of years meant nothing here. The Valorians fought back with all their superior technology and training. They were still the best warriors in the galaxy. They destroyed 200 human ships in the first hour alone. But for every vessel they killed, 2 more took its place. Humanity had built ships faster than the Dominion thought possible, hiding them in places the enemy never thought to look. "Commander," Zorath watched his fleet being slowly surrounded and destroyed. He had never seen anything like this. In 40 conquests, he had never faced an enemy who fought with such complete disregard for their own survival. Human pilots flew their damaged ships directly into Valorian cruisers. Human crews refused to abandon their posts even when their vessels were burning around them. "They are insane," his second-in-command said. "They are throwing their lives away." Zorath shook his head slowly. "No, they are not insane. They are angry." He finally understood what he was facing. This was not a military operation. It was revenge. Every human pilot out there had lost someone they loved. Every crew member had watched their world burn. They were not fighting to win a war. They were fighting to make the Valorians pay for what they had done, and they did not care if they had died in the process. While the main battle raged, a small ship slipped through the chaos toward the Valorian flagship. It was tiny compared to the warships around it, barely larger than a shuttle. Its pilot was a 63-year-old physicist who had never flown in combat before. Linda. Morrison's hands were steady on the controls as she navigated through the debris of destroyed ships. The weapon sat behind her, humming softly with barely contained power. All around her, explosions lit up the darkness of space like fireworks. She had memorized the path weeks ago. Through the third defensive line, past the sensor arrays between the support cruisers, every turn, every maneuver had been practiced 1,000 times in simulation. Now she flew it for real. The Valorians did not notice her approach. They were too busy trying to survive the main assault. Their sensors were overloaded with thousands of contacts. One more small ship was invisible in the chaos. When she was close enough to see the flagship's running lights, she opened a communication channel. Her message was broadcast on all frequencies, reaching every ship in both fleets. "This is Dr. Linda Morrison of Earth. I am transmitting from grid coordinates 774 by 229. I want the Valorian command to know who is doing this, and I want my people to know why." She paused, thinking of her daughter. Thinking of Buenos Aires, thinking of 2 million souls who deserved to be remembered. "This is for everyone we lost. This is for every world you have burned. This is what happens when you make humanity grieve." She activated the weapon. The sky above Earth turned colors that human eyes had never seen before. Reality itself tore open around the Valorian flagship, creating a wound in the fabric of space that burned brighter than the sun. The flagship and 300 vessels nearest to it were pulled into that wound. They did not explode or break apart. They simply ceased to exist, swallowed by something that should not have been possible. Commander Zoreth had 17 seconds to understand what was happening before his ship vanished. In those 17 seconds, he finally realized the truth. The humans had not been fighting to survive. They had been buying time. Every battle, every sacrifice had been designed to lead to this moment. The wound in space burned for 17 minutes before it sealed itself. When it closed, nothing remained of the Valorian command structure. Their flagship, their commanders, their most advanced warships were gone. The surviving Valorian vessels fled. There was no order to retreat. There was no coordination. They simply ran, their crews terrified of the species that had done the impossible. They carried tales of what they had witnessed to every corner of the Dominion, spreading fear wherever they went. On Earth, people emerged from their underground shelters and looked up at the sky. It was blue again, the same color it had always been, but nothing would ever be the same. Daniel Carter watched the final battle reports come in. The human fleet had lost 2,000 ships and almost 50,000 people. It was the greatest sacrifice in human history, but they had one. He lived long enough to see the first human embassy established in Valorian space. Not as a conquered territory, but as an equal partner. The Dominion, shattered by their defeat, eventually agreed to peace terms that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. Daniel died peacefully at 91, surrounded by his grandchildren. According to his family, his final words were simple: "They really should have left us alone." In the decades that followed, the story of Earth's stand spread across the galaxy. Other species who had been conquered by the Dominion began to resist. Inspired by the small blue planet that refused to surrender, the empire that had ruled for 1,000 years slowly crumbled, replaced by something new. And in the halls where diplomats gathered and treaties were signed, everyone knew the truth about humanity. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the most advanced or the most numerous. But they were the most stubborn, the most determined, the most dangerous when wounded. The Valorians had thought Earth would grieve quietly when Buenos Aires fell. They had expected tears and surrender and despair. Instead, they got Linda Morrison. They got Maria Santos. They got 8 billion people who turned their grief into fire and their tears into weapons. The sky had turned earthly that day, burning with colors no one had seen before. And across the galaxy, if everyone learned what that meant, it meant humanity was watching, and humanity would never grieve quietly again.